and Hanna, who is the head teacher, as I mentioned, of agriculture science at Menai High. Also seconded to the Department of Education, leading, I think, professional development for chemistry and biology, and doing just such amazing things. We have Jessica Jones, who's currently at UNSW, who's done some amazing work with Anne, who'll talk about her experiences, and Kevin Hao, who's in Year 12, been involved in similar research projects at high school. So I want to stop talking. I'm going to hand over to the absolutely incredible, brilliant Anne. Welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us, and thanks for the opportunity. It's actually a really nice opportunity to reflect on how we got here and the journey that it's been. And it's really lovely to be in the presence of Jess and Kevin and all of you, of course. So I thought I'd just start off by telling you a little bit about where I've come from. So my background was originally in pharmacy. So I was actually a community pharmacist for a while. And then I went into primary education first up before doing a Masters of Gifted and Talented Education. And that got me my first position with Menai High School. I was doing an enrichment program for primary school students who are attending from local primary schools once a week at Menai, and with 2 other high schools affiliated. But I had complete reign over what I taught. And because I had that, science background, there was a lot of science. And I really enjoyed watching the students, interact with their questions and just freely explore and suggest things that we could explore. We went to the Environmental Education Centre. We visited ANSTO. I wrangled the telescope into school so they could look at sunspots. We made traffic lights and learnt about parallel and series, and there was no particular curriculum to follow. It was just enrichment for these highly capable primary school students. We even made it to NASA in America on a space camp trip. So it was just phenomenal. But then that got, my appetite whetted a bit, and I wanted to do high school teaching. So I went to the principal at Menai at the time and I said, look, would you support my application for a physics teaching scholarship that was being advertised at the time? So she did support that. And then she said, but I have a biology opening. Do you want it? So I said, well, okay. So I landed in the middle of a Year 12 year. So they were a term into Year 12. And I took on this Year 12 class, and there's no looking back. It's just amazing to work with people who had, when you get to the end of high school, those students that have selected science really, really want to be there. And you as a teacher want to be there. So it was amazing. So this is just a picture of the background there. We are an agricultural high school, so I have a little farm, and there's some of our students. But the story really starts, as far as like scientific research, with the beginning of the science extension course. So my own children, around the time that I was doing all this, were starting to get really interested in science. And I ended up being invited to judge the Young Scientist Awards. And then I became the coordinator of the awards and got to chaperone a couple of trips to ISEF, the International Science and Engineering Fair, one in Phoenix, one in Pittsburgh. Now, you'll hear about the ISEF experience firsthand from Jess and Kevin, and that'll be amazing. But as a teacher, it really is one of the most incredibly inspiring things to attend. It opens up your eyes to what is actually possible for students. Like you think, oh, no, surely we can't do that. We can't do that. But then you go and students from all around the world have done these incredible things. And it just opens your eyes to what's possible. And then the science extension course arrived. And with it, all the depth studies that were, being implemented in all of the science subjects. So it's like all my Christmases came at once. And of course, I wanted to bring back what we'd seen in ISEF back to my classes. And as I tried to build the Year 10 science research project, it just wasn't the same amount of time as you got in a depth study or in science extension. So I really credit the opportunities that we've had to the science extension course, because it just opens it up as something that you get to do, but it actually counts, because you don't have the time. The reality is, if you're working towards your HSC, it's hard to fit that amazing research on top of your load. But if you can get credit for it, then it's a lot more freeing. So this is the first cohort. This is 2019. And basically they paved the way for success at Menai High School. We had, and I will take the time to tell you about each of their projects, because I think it's important to sort of see where we've come from and just some of the challenges we had. So we had spiders, oysters, epileptic fruit flies, UV damage, extracting DNA, antibiotic resistance, and oil spills. So I'll talk to you about each of those projects. So you can see in that green net there on the screen, there's some light. There's actually a St. Andrew's cross spider in there, happily in its spider's web, and there's some alcohol in front of that. And Matt, who's standing behind that, wanted to see not so much the effect of alcohol on the spider's ability to build a web, which has been done. He wanted to test an enzyme that he'd read about in biology in his depth study, alcohol dehydrogenase. He wanted to see if alcohol dehydrogenase being provided to a spider that had been exposed to the alcohol could reverse some of the effects on the spider's web. So to give you a proper from the ground up explanation, spiders at St. Andrew's Cross will build this web and it will remain intact inside of this netting. But if you dismantle it, it will build it again. And normally it's a very neat, tidy little web, little cells visible. If the alcohol is, if the spider is fed with alcohol via a cricket that's sprayed with alcohol being fed to it, and then you dismantle the web, it gets a little bit tipsy, for want of a better word, and the web is a mess. And so he wanted to see if he could compare what the web was like after alcohol consumption for the spider versus alcohol and then the enzyme being provided to the spider. And it's just incredible the way that he came up with this, because we didn't have any fancy equipment. We used a light from the Kappa faculty, and he discovered that the spiders actually only like to build their webs in the middle of the night. So 2 a.m. he was up dismantling webs every night. But these are some of the photos he's taken, and he came up with his own method. So on the right-hand side are these tidy webs that are typical of the St. Andrew's Cross spider. And he defined certain shapes and arrangements in that web as like a cell, a minor cell, and a support strand. And so this is his own terminology to try and describe what was happening in a web. And then on the left there, that's the drunk spider. And so he would count, and he sat there and he counted literally hundreds of webs, and he counted the panels, and he compared, in terms of support strands, major cells and minor cells, how that changed between the normal cell and the cell after the spider had been exposed to alcohol, and then again a third time when the spider had been provided with some alcohol dehydrogenase. And the way he did that was he basically incorporated that with the food, so that the spider would consume the alcohol or consume the enzyme through the fruit fly. So that was a really interesting experiment, one of my favorites actually, because of just the commitment that went into it. You know, he's working out of hours all through the night, weekends, and the course just allowed for that. He did find there was a difference, that the enzyme was able to restore some of that, which was really fascinating. A second project was, and I'll leave the one that won to the end. I'll just talk about one more and then I'll get to Phoebe, who actually got a prize that year. We had Isabella research epileptic fruit flies. Now, who knew that that was even a thing? But basically, she was interested. So the group had come out of Year 11 biology with these first ever depth studies, and they'd all studied enzymes of choice. And because the depth study was so open, they'd gone and found their own. And so she'd read about a particular enzyme that could alleviate some of the symptoms of epilepsy, and she wanted to try it. And I went, well, you can't do that on a person. That's not going to happen. So she, found out that there was such a thing as a fruit fly that had a gene for epilepsy. And we looked around the world for it. We found there was a Manhattan fruit fly. No, not a Manhattan, a Manchester fruit fly facility that kept these fruit flies. So we contacted them. And of course, we had a problem with border control trying to import them into the country. So we arranged with Sydney Uni, actually, that it was okay to bring them in unless we wanted to pay, basically fruit fly hotel fees, which is a little bit steep for a public school. They said if we had a facility in Australia that could receive the fruit flies, and then we would then get the offspring, then that would be okay, because they could make sure that there were no, they weren't carrying anything, etc. So it's Sydney Uni kindly agreed to receive the epileptic fruit flies. And when they had their little babies, we got those. So we had these epileptic fruit flies, and we had some ones without that gene. And then the challenge was to investigate, how are we going to measure? How is Isabella going to measure the effect of this enzyme on epileptic activity? So she did some reading, and apparently if you shake an epileptic fruit fly, it twitches for a lot longer than a normal fruit fly would. And so she designed this thing where you could see on the left some Petri dishes. And so she would put a fruit fly into a Petri dish, and she would put it on a vortex mixer. We don't have any fancy equipment at school, but it was just like a thing that vibrated for an exact amount of time. And then she would film the path that the fruit fly walked. And so you can see there in videos 1 and 5, so the first and the third there, that would be a normal fruit fly. So after being shaken vigorously for 3 seconds, the fruit fly could still walk around fairly reasonably. But the second and fourth videos there, the screenshot there, the fruit fly would just walk around itself. And so she worked out some kind of way of quantifying the degree to which the fruit fly would, have a straight path as opposed to take up a particular area. I think she measured the area of the largest blob on that path. And her one was a little bit challenging because she was having trouble keeping track of which fruit fly was which after she'd fed it the enzyme. But there was some promising results, and I would love for someone to take this up. It was really fascinating. The third one that I'm going to talk about is this one, which was gurgling and bubbling in the back of the lab all year. So you can see in the left-hand side there, we had some separate tanks for oysters. We had to get air filters. We knew nothing about this, but this is what you do to keep the oysters alive, to keep the oxygen flowing. And we had equal number of oysters in each one. And Phoebe wanted to test the effect of microplastics on oyster filtration rate. So she worked out that she could do that if she put phytoplankton to different concentrate or to the same concentration, I believe, and then measure put some different amounts of microplastics in each tank. And she could look at the filtration rate by analyzing the amount of light that passed through the liquid, because the phytoplankton would get filtered out. And so it would go from like a greenish color to a clearer color. And so she was looking at whether having microplastics in there affected that filtration rate. It was a lot more challenging than it even sounds, because our colorimeter did not pick up those minor differences. And if she tried to put so much phytoplankton that it was very noticeably green, the oysters died. And we had to ring up the seafood place and see if they'd sell us live oysters in large quantities. They didn't understand why, but no, we didn't want them shucked. So she basically devised a mechanism where she would extract some liquid, filter it out, put it in a cuvette, pass light through, and then measure the intensity of the light passing through. And she got some really interesting results where the oysters were being affected by the microplastics, but it wasn't in the way that was expected. She found that they filtered faster when there was more microplastic. But then on this next slide, we happened to have at the time a hired scanning electron microscope. There was this opportunity for schools to get one. We had one in the lab. So she put on the right there the microplastics themselves under the microscope so you can see them. And on the left there, she thought she'd dissect the gut of an oyster and see if she could find any. And she found basically what looks like some, meshed together microplastic. The size matches up. There's a little bit of the round structure in there. So she was able to detect the microplastic within the oyster. And these were the oysters that were filtering faster at first. She did some research, and apparently the microplastics do cause the oysters to filter faster, but then it affects their reproductive abilities and their other physiological functions. So Phoebe was selected as the first Menai High School student to ever win a prize at the Young Scientist Awards. She came third in Earth and Environmental Science, and then she was selected to represent New South Wales at the BHP National Awards, where she was actually picked to go to ICEF the following year. But the following year was COVID year, so that one got cancelled. So we didn't end up going, which was a real shame. But she did get picked to represent Australia at the Stockholm Junior Water Prize, where she made it to the top 4. That was all online as well. So she did phenomenally. And this was the beginning, I think, of the journey for Menai High School, because there were generations of young students who sat in labs with this going on around them. And they asked questions, and we took the time to explain it. We took the time to pull in the older students and just to explain what was happening. So I think this is where it all started, because once you see the achievement and what can be done, it just goes from there. So I just quickly fly through the success that we've had since then, because Menai High School has had one person every year since the inception of the Science Extension course be selected for ISEF, which is insane in my mind. That's something I could have only dreamt of, like just one I would have dreamt of. It's insane. So this is Sarah Hens. She was the following year. It ran online, ISEF, because still being affected by the pandemic. She won first place at ISEF in a category of behavioral and social sciences. She had a crazy project where she looked at nootropics, which are like over-the-counter substances that are supposed to assist with memory and cognitive function. And she tested the memory of mice. She had a vet, sign off that this, they were not going to be interfering with the mice function and all of that. And she basically had a swimming pool set up in her lounge room with a video camera on top. And she quartered the tank, this round tank, and she taught the mice like where the platform was. And mice apparently will swim to the nearest platform because they want to get out of water. So this is stuff that she's found out. And she found that there was no effect for the mice that were consuming these products and the ones that were not. And she was then using that to question the efficacy and the ethics of selling ginseng, lover, and whatever else they sell over the counter to improve memory. The interesting thing about that one is that the video equipment is really expensive. The software that we needed for that was super expensive. We contacted them. They said it was $6,000. We explained, we are a public high school. We do not have that kind of money. So they offered it to her for free because she was a student. And what we've learned from this process is that you just ask and people are willing to help students achieve amazing things. That's one thing we've really gotten out of that. This was the following year. This is Talia, who also participated in ISEF online. She was looking at the effects of carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere on the emergence of antibiotic resistance and found that there was an effect. Now, again, we do not have a $7,000 carbon dioxide incubator, so she had to improvise. And we got one of those SodaStream carbon dioxide pump things, and she would squirt it into this perfectly sealed tank, which would then squirt. It was amazing. She placed third in the world in microbiology and also won a trip to Italy to do some research there. So it's just insane what has been opened up through these experiences for these students. Sarah Arnold in 2020, so she went in 2023, but she was a 2022 graduate, was our first ISEF participant to actually get to go. She wanted to study cancer cells, and I said, we just don't have the facility, like obviously. But she was quite keen. She did her research. She wanted to look at the effects of exercise, or specifically the buildup of lactic acid on cancer cells. She'd found a link. She's quite athletic, interested in exercise, also interested in cancer. So she contacted a company to see, how expensive it would be to get this machine. It was $35,000. We explained we are a school. They gave us 2 places that we could try who might let us use them. They said UNSW has one, and so does the Garvan Institute. So we did try to contact both of those, and the Garvan came through, and that's Dr. Andy Phillips next to Sarah on the right, and he took her in and he helped her conduct her research on breast cancer cells at the Garvan while she was in year 12. She got to present her work at Macquarie University, and it's just opened up. She went to the same uni as Dr. Phillips, at least initially. I think he's moved on, and he was mentoring her to do extra research in her first year at university and just opening up her whole career in research. And that's the DNA staircase there. And then we have, sorry, if I can get this to work. There we go. And then we have Jess. I don't want to steal Jess's thunder, but Jess's experiment was amazing. We did have some challenges, but I will let Jess speak to that. I really don't want to take away from that. But Jess was also able to represent us at ISEF, and I know she had a wonderful time with an incredible project, and really, really fascinating results as well, but I will not talk to that. But I wanted to just briefly talk about like how, what does it take to do this? And I just reflected on, how a teacher can support this in the classroom. And I think it takes an openness to ideas. Like, I think you have to be a teacher that sits back and goes, well, maybe it's possible, because, you know, you wouldn't think that someone's saying, oh, I want to research cancer cells, or, you know, nootropics on mice. Like, you wouldn't think these things could happen. But they can be facilitated. I think you need to be willing to take risks and fail. We've had tiers almost every year in science extension, usually by the top students. And I think that's just part of the process, and that resilience and the ability to improvise and to work around the limited resources that we sometimes have. We need to be able to be willing to ask for help, because it is very surprising what organizations are willing to do for students, and ask for mentors and ask to borrow and use equipment. I've put these images up here because I also think, you know, one thing that a teacher can do is to collect headlines as inspiration. Students don't necessarily come with a ton of ideas. Sometimes they have a passion area, but some of these are just from today. This antibiotic resistance one, forecast to kill 39 million people by 2050. That's just from today. There was another one on black holes or something. And these are just, I don't necessarily read every article. I don't really have time for all of that, but I collect headlines. And then we spend a lot of time, and Jess would attest to that, a lot of time planning our project. We're quite happy to spend 2/3 of a term picking our question area. We're just looking very broadly, and then we start to narrow it down, and then it doesn't work and you go somewhere else. And I think that's worth it for a really good question that will keep you engaged and excited all year. Keeping your eyes open as a teacher, though, also for opportunities. So I mentioned we had a scanning electron microscope in school at the same time. We wouldn't have thought we were using that, but it was an opportunity. It was, you know, a reasonable amount of money. There was some organization that was loaning them to schools for a week, and I went, why not? We did that. AmGen is a Sydney Uni initiative where they allow students to do biotechnology in their school. We've borrowed that as well each year, and some students have used it in their science extension project. I've taken Year 10 students to operate the Parks dish. There's so much out there, and I think you just got to like scour the opportunities that are there and be willing to give everything a go. And then improvising, of course, but that's a big part of the fun. So there is another it's like source of inspiration. The Department of Education now showcases the science extension project each year in an annual journal. So there are 3 volumes, I believe, are published now, and you know, you can flick through, because we build science on the shoulders of those who've gone before us. So this is ICEF. We've had so much success as Australians. Just getting there is phenomenal. Like the fact that, you know, Jess got a free trip to America to compete with the best of the best, and Kevin as well. Like it's amazing. It's the Olympic Games, and you've represented your country in science with a school, you know, your high school HSC project is amazing. In the 2 short years that OSCEF has been looking after the ICEF team, Australia has won 8 grant awards from 18 projects, which is like 44% winners, but everybody there is an absolute winner, and they get so much out of it. And the networking, I'm sure that Jess and Kevin will be able to speak to that. Finally, how can universities and professional societies help? So just got some stimulus there for me. We need mentors all the time, so maybe being open to that. Sharing your own journey. So down the bottom there, the students in Science Quest, if you look carefully, that's actually a screenshot of a Zoom where we had a judging session, but one of our judges was a superhero, Dr. Barry Marshall from Perth, who agreed to come on board and judge with us. And he spoke about his own science science fair journey as well as part of that. And I just think scientists sharing their own journeys with students is so inspiring, because they make it seem so much more possible and accessible. I think if universities and others can be open to allowing students in and allowing access to equipment at times, obviously supervised and with training, but things even as simple as like UV vis or fluorescence microscopy, these are not attainable for public schools, and it wouldn't take very much for access to some of that. I would encourage also that you don't assume a student can't do something. They rise to the opportunity when they're passionate about something. And then it would be really good to see an increase and a continued increase in the valuing of science extension as far as like university offers and what it means for when you're applying for early entry in that, because I think it speaks volumes if a student has completed science extension. I think if they've put that amount of effort and they've answered a question, I think that should be credited much more than what an ATAR might show about a student. Practical help, there's also opportunities for sponsorships of an award or of, to help send some students over. Judging help, we were always desperate for. Promotion to get judges, and opportunities for students to present their work. And that's what some of these images are. So we've had, evenings, and the University of Wollongong used to have the science fair. But any opportunity for students to talk about their work like tonight is great. And I know there was a road trip and there's the Explore conference. So that's increasing as well. But that also builds awareness and inspiration amongst other students. So that's it from me. Are there any questions before we go into the real superstars?
And I'm just so speechless. This is just extraordinary. And I knew you and the team were amazing, but this is just next level. It's the future of science in Australia is with you. We have a question from Joe. Take it away.
I just got all over you. Absolutely, yeah, as Sabine said, inspirational, brilliant. And I absolutely, your comment about spending a lot of time working out what the question is so important. I know that when I was doing my PhD, I spent the whole first year thinking about what was the question. And doing other stuff as well, but I mean that really was the focus. So and really important that I got to that point where I actually understood what I was meant to be doing. But I just wondered about how influential you feel you are in actually choosing those topics and choosing and driving the direction of the research. Do you go, hey, this is a good idea, I think this would be really good, or do they come to you more?
It's more of a mix. So we have a lot of one-on-one sessions. It's usually a very small class. That image there of that first class, that was the largest we've had. So we have it after school sessions, they're extended sessions. It's very relaxed, and they come to me with their areas that they have been interested in, or I provide these headlines as stimulus. And then they might go, oh, this sounds interesting. Let me look up some things. So it's a bit of a combination, but they do come up with their own topic that they are really passionate about, because if they don't, they won't have the follow through. Yeah. They can't, they won't do so much work for something that I was wondering about. And
sorry, I'm just going to, before Jono jumps in, I just want to ask a follow-on. Do you find that the students who do the extension science go on to science degrees in that area? So if I'm doing one in biology, do I go into a biology degree, or do I actually branch out and do something different?
It has mostly been in those areas, but I don't know. I'm not sure. They do all do science. They almost all do science, and they want to do research. And it's largely in that area. So we had one girl who was looking at DNA extracted from hair follicles. She was just yanking out her own hair. And she's gone on to forensic science. And we've had, we did have a biology go into, dingoes. It was not earth. It was dingoes. So they do. I think it does inspire them, and they usually pick topics that they are already engaged with as well.
Cool. Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Amazing. So we've got a watch party in a few offices down the corridor. Jono, Addie, and Raphael. Jono, I'm guessing you had a question.
No, it's me for once.
It's Addie. Sorry.
Question. So watch me ask in a very convoluted way. So it's kind of a follow-on. Is like, so I know, Isbeth is a PhD student. It's very hard to design an experiment or a thought as to how to do things. So. And you said there's a lot of mixture as to how much a student contributes and to how much their teacher can contribute to designing the experiment and how to make it well-rounded and stuff. So my question is, are there strategies already implemented, or how would you suggest that you standardize that across different schools? Because I could imagine, depending on your teacher and what environment, what school, some people get more or less support. And so I was wondering how that is, standardized to make it a bit more fair, I suppose, between different schools.
Well, I think what makes it fair is that the science research projects are internally marked. And so it's completely up to you, because then when they're standardized, it's based on the exam, which is going to assess your understanding of the scientific process and putting it all together. But in terms of what you've had access to, mentor or not, equipment or not, whether your experiment worked out, whether that's going to be, you've got the freedom to do that because it's in the safety of your own school bubble. And so all the students within that same school will have access to the same, to the same level of support. And that makes it fair as far as rankings. And then with the HSC leveling that out between schools, it doesn't matter. And you've just got that freedom to try different things within your school.
Can I just say, and I remember we were on the OSEF judging thing, and it was a project that was using some Bunnings filters and fans. So like, I think what's really also inspirational is the ingenuity of students and teachers to actually design things that are also, I guess, easier to do with common equipment. Yeah, so look, and can I ask a kind of a follow-up question, which might kind of touch some nerves in terms of workload, right? I mean, you are clearly going above and beyond. I mean, I've seen what you do, like you after hours, weekends, and you're so dedicated, right? And all of our teachers are so dedicated, but they are under a lot of time pressures. How do we do this? How do we encourage more teachers to engage with, say, the science extension, which I think I agree with you is amazing, but also encourage them and reward them and acknowledge that it does take a lot of time, I would imagine, to supervise.
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges of the course. To do it properly, you really need to timetable it off the timetable. If this is timetabled for an hour during the school day, it's not happening. We were after school and it's like a 4 to 6 or whatever it is, but you can stay longer. And the parents are all aware of that. And we would stay longer if we needed to work on something. And we occasionally had some Saturdays that we came in. And this is a real challenge. So I was head teacher. So like I took that on board. I loved it, but I felt like I could never pass it on to someone else because it was such a big task. I couldn't ask one of my staff to take that on unless they really, really were passionate about it. I think that's one of the ongoing challenges because, even if you get a period allocation during the day, it doesn't quite make up for the level of commitment. And it's always like this background because it's like the teacher is mentoring 4, 5, 6 students as well. Obviously, they could have their own mentors externally, but I think the teacher plays such an important role of being that additional mentor. And so you've got to be all over it and checking in how you're going, benchmarks, timelines, all of that. So I think that is a challenge. And I think maybe part of it is to give time to teachers who do take up the subject, but also maybe the opportunities for teachers to visit ISEF and to see it for themselves. It's just inspiring. And at that point, you just do it for the passion of it and for professional development. But I think that's an ongoing challenge that unfortunately I don't have an answer to.
But what you're doing is turbocharging the journey towards science research and our sovereign capabilities in STEM. So I think it's fundamentally important. We as professional societies, I mean, I think we can do some stuff, but yeah, we need to keep talking. Now, look, let's leave some more questions for Anne maybe after Jess and Kevin. So thank you so much, Anne. That was really incredible. So let's hand over to Jess, and again, thank you so much, Anne. Look forward to hearing more about your amazing work.
Hi, my name is Jess. I'm very, very excited to speak to you all today, particularly about my project. So I'd love to begin with that. So my investigation was called Microplastics, Anything But a Small Problem, an investigation into how different sizes of Australia's most common waterway microplastics, polyethylene, affects the physiological functions of Daphnia magna, a project that was successful enough to allow me to participate at the International Science and Engineering Fair in LA. Although the title of my research is fairly self-explanatory and admittedly a bit long, my research aimed to explore how different sizes of polyethylene affect the heart rate, swimming speed, and mortality of Daphnia magna, a small platonic crustacean that is often used in research to assess environmental toxicity. The findings were both fascinating and alarming, shedding light on the real-world dangers of plastic pollution in our waterways. I selected 3 sizes of polyethylene microplastics, 425 to 500 micrometers, 600 to 710 micrometers, and 850 to 1,000 microliters. While I initially hoped to use much smaller microplastics, closer to the sizes reported in current literature, my science extension teacher, Miss Hanna, advised me to avoid microplastics that were too small to be seen with the naked eye for safety reasons. Although these posed a key limitation to my research, the larger microplastics still did produce some fascinating results. In accordance with the current literature, I hypothesized that the polyethylene microplastics size 425 to 500 micrometers would cause the most damage to the Daphnia magna's physiological functions. In order to effectively test my research question, my methodology was split into two sections: pre-experimentation and the primary investigation and data collection. There was a lot of preparation to be done before the beginning of my experiment, including creating a habitable space for the Daphnia. I left 4 tanks of water to age for approximately 2 days. This was done to eliminate any traces of chlorine and to stabilize the water chemistry. I also needed to calculate the amount of microplastics needed for each culture. The Daphnia themselves were fed a consistent diet of 4 crushed up grains of instant dried yeast and a drop of phytoblast. They were stored at room temperature, and an app called Colony Counter was used to even the number in each, with a total of 30 Daphnia in each culture. The primary investigation and data collection was then split into a further 3 components. The Colony Counter app was again used to track the Daphnia's mortality each day. The swimming speed of the Daphnia required quantitative data collection that was achieved by using a phone to record their ascent to the top of a measuring cylinder. The Daphnia were transported via pipette into a glass measuring cylinder filled with 100 milliliters of aged water, to which they would settle at the bottom upon being introduced to that. A phototactic response test was then conducted in a dark room using a flashlight held directly above the opening of the measuring cylinder, and then recorded how long the Daphnia's ascent to the top of the measuring cylinder took, with the results being recorded in seconds. The heart rate of the Daphnia magna was measured by taking one individual out of each group and observing them under a microscope. The Daphnia were then transported onto a concave slide through a pipette with the bottom of the tube cut off to allow for the capture of the larger Daphnia without damaging them. This was also implemented to ensure a sufficient volume of water was taken for the Daphnia to survive whilst being observed. The heart rate of the Daphnia magna was recorded in 10-second intervals that were later multiplied by 6 to avoid a stress response. After each heart rate data collection, the Daphnia were then transported back to their respective cultures via the same pipette. Unpaired student t-test assuming unequal variances was used to determine if there was a statistical significance for each of the 3 different size polyethylene groups compared to the control group, which received no microplastics. The t-test revealed that the microplastics size 425 to 500 micrometers had the most statistically significant impacts on the physiological functions of the Daphnia magna. More specifically, it increased the mortality and reduced the swimming speed with p equals 0.04 and 0.02 respectively. Interestingly, the size of the microplastics did not have a statistically significant impact on the Daphnia's heart rate across all 3 groups. The 425 to 500 micrometer microplastics had the least impact on the Daphnia's heart rate, with a p-value of 0.89, coinciding closely with the surface area of the water they occupied, leaving large amount of water clear, potentially resulting in more successful gas exchange, as the average heart rate of the culture was 346 beats per minute, being similar to the control group with 344 beats per minute. Current literature reveals that the heart rate of the Daphnia is impacted by anoxic conditions, which have been proven to be affected by suspended manufactured nanoparticles. This leads to the inference that the larger microplastics with a greater surface area may have prevented sufficient gas exchange, therefore having a larger impact on their heart rate. I also briefly want to touch on a very unexpected outcome that manifested over the course of the experimental period. As the experiment progressed, the Daphnia magna cultures had been polluted with microplastics gradually began to darken in color, and by the 6th day, they were so dark that their heart rate was unable to be located. Consequently, this meant that the heart rate on the 6th day could not be recorded. The dark brown coloring of the Daphnia became pronounced on the 3rd day of being exposed to the microplastics and was not present in the control group. The Daphnia magna appeared much larger in size, had sluggish movements, and had a fuzzy appearance about them. Previous research indicates that these symptoms are a result of a gram-positive bacterium known as Posterior ramosa, commonly known to infect Daphnia magna. The common denominator are the microplastics. However, there is nothing to suggest that the bacterium would have thrived on the surface of the microplastics, as they were lab-made and transported in sealed containers, which were only open for a brief amount of time during their transition to the Daphnia cultures. Accordingly, current literature suggests that the bacteria moving from the microplastics to the new aquatic environments can grow at a much faster rate. While I understand that most people are generally aware that the pollution is harmful and negatively impacting the Earth's ecosystems in real time, I aim to go beyond that basic understanding. By highlighting how the microplastics impacted the Daphnia magna, I was able to discuss future directions for research and touch on the potential effects that it would have on humans through bioaccumulation. Ultimately, I sought to create a more personal connection between the science behind the issue and individuals. My hope was to raise awareness about this global problem in a way that resonates on a deeper, more personal level. After the completion of my project, it was Miss Hanna who introduced me to OSCEF and ICEF. OSCEF, more formally known as the Australian Science and Engineering Fair, is a national competition for high school students from years 9 to 12 to submit their research projects. Projects are judged and move through a number of stages in a competition for a position on the OSCEF team that represents Australia at the International Science and Engineering Fair. Winning OSCEF means an all expenses paid trip to America where students will compete with others from around the globe. I submitted my work, and in the same fashion as I approach everything, I didn't think too much about it because I had already decided that I definitely was not going to be selected. Lo and behold, my project was one of the 9 selected to represent Australia, and I was lucky enough to be a part of the most successful OSCEF team to date. Although I was extremely nervous to present my work, I had an enormous amount of fun exploring LA and becoming good friends with my teammates, 5 of which happened to be in the same category as me, Earth and Environmental Science. Being able to set up my booth and poster as evidence of my hard work was one of the most rewarding feelings ever. Of course, I was absolutely terrified for judging day, but my nerves quickly subsided when I realized how fun and how refreshing it was to be able to have a conversation with not only scientists who had a deep understanding of the field and my work, but people who were also genuinely interested in hearing about my research. I really do appreciate all the friends and family who attempted to listen about my research, but it's simply not the same. Despite not winning a grand award, getting to speak about my project and making the most amazing friends was definitely rewarding enough for me, making ICEF an experience I'll never forget. As the only member of the OSCEF team who had never participated in a science competition prior to ICEF, I quickly realized how many opportunities I had missed out on simply due to a lack of awareness. ICEF not only introduced me to the world of scientific discovery and innovation, but it also showed me the immense value of having these competitions in fostering both personal and academic growth. More importantly, it significantly boosted my confidence, not just in my scientific abilities, but also in my potential to make a meaningful impact. That's why I strongly encourage both teachers and students to actively seek out and participate in as many science competitions as possible. These events provide a unique platform for students to push their limits, ignite their passion for discovery, and connect with the larger community of thinkers and innovators. Don't let a lack of awareness hold you back, as I almost did. These opportunities can truly be life-changing. Now, I'd love to stand here and tell you that my project came from a lifelong passion for science, but that is not entirely true. In fact, the real story behind my journey and how I managed to get to ICEF is about the incredible teachers I had the privilege of learning from. It was their dedication, passion, and the deep love for their subject that truly opened my eyes to the wonders of science. Their encouragement and enthusiasm are what sparked my own interest in research and led me to where I am today. My journey with science began in Year 9 when I was lucky enough to be selected as a part of the science enrichment class, which was the top science class in the grade. To be completely honest, I'm not sure how or why I was selected, but I was beyond thrilled. Being in a learning environment surrounded by kids who enjoyed the subject and wanted to perform well created such an exciting atmosphere. I thoroughly enjoyed every class and was determined to do well. Despite this, Year 9 is when I began to struggle with some personal issues and my grades fell. I was devastated about my marks and I was terrified that I was going to be removed from the class and be unable to continue with the enrichment course in Year 10. When my struggles became apparent to my teacher, he pulled me aside and without me even having to express my fears, he reassured me that he saw my passion and potential to excel in the subject. This is one of those moments in my life in which I'll never forget because I am truly of the belief that if he hadn't pulled me aside and expressed his faith in me, I wouldn't be speaking to you all today. Regardless of my grades, I managed to remain in the enrichment class for Year 10, which was the year in which I discovered the aspect of science that I love most, independent research. It was during this year that the class was required to conduct an independent research project. If I remember correctly, I did not do well at all on this project. But what I'll never forget is how much fun I had. I remember feeling so cool getting to use all the equipment, and I was even delighted to stay behind at lunchtime to work on my experiment. But most of all, I had an absolute blast writing my report and getting to share my results. Not only that, but I also enjoyed critiquing my own work and learning from the numerous numerous mistakes that I made. Finally, year 11 rolled around and I decided to take biology and investigating science as my 2 senior science courses. My love for the subject was only growing, and with those classes becoming my favorite to attend. Furthermore, I was one of only 2 students who achieved full marks on the independent research task for biology. And of course, I was absolutely stoked as this was a big improvement from year 10. This was also the year that I first heard about science extension, which seemed right up my alley. When it finally came time to solidify my decision as to whether I'd be taking the course in year 12, I was a nervous wreck. Throughout my entire high schooling journey, I'd always struggled with my confidence and was always doubting my own capabilities. And I was of the absolute belief that I was not intelligent enough to take on science extension. During this time, I felt as though I had no one to talk to about the issue because I was terrified that people would actually confirm my suspicion and advise me against taking the course. Looking back, I'm now very aware that my anxiety over the situation was completely overdramatic, but at the time, it really did mean the world to me. So naturally, the only person I felt I could turn to was my investigating science teacher. When I explained my anxieties to her, I distinctly remember her pulling this funny face as if to say, like, girl, what are you talking about? And of course, she dished out the common sense that I lacked and told me to go for it. And then I could always drop the subject if it wasn't right for me. It was once again that the support from a wonderful science teacher propelled me in the right direction, becoming another defining moment in my science journey. After I finally decided to get over myself, I was equal parts excited and absolutely terrified to start science extension. However, I was particularly excited about having Miss Hanna as my teacher because everybody knew that she was the coolest and best science teacher in the faculty. I had known of Miss Hanna since year 7, and in year 9, I was honestly heartbroken when I found out that she taught physics and science extension because I didn't believe I'd ever be able to tackle one of those subjects. So the fact that I was able to work with her one-on-one was the most amazing experience. Coming into science extension, I still had major doubts about my own intelligence and ability to juggle all my subjects, but I quickly learned that Miss Hanna was going to be there with me every step of the way. She helped me during our allocated class time. She helped me when I crashed her other classes. She helped me during lunch times, and she helped me after school. I faced numerous problems throughout the creation of my project, but I was never once left to sort it out by myself. Once again, I was blessed enough to have a teacher in my life who believed in me and prevented me from giving up. And I without a doubt believe that it was Miss Hanna who had the most profound impact on me. Without her, I would have never produced a piece of work I'm proud of. I would have never thought to enter any competitions or apply to have my work published. I would have never won any awards, and I would have never known about ISEF, where I had the chance to meet the most amazing people like Kevin. If there's one thing I hope every high school teacher listening will take away from my speech, it's this. Your unwavering support, your passion for what you teach, and your kind words have the power to transform a student's life in ways you may never fully realize. I am living proof of that thanks to the 3 incredible teachers who believed in me when I struggled to believe in myself, Mr. Bean, Miss Gray, and Miss Hanna. This is not just a thank you to them, it's an acknowledgement of how deeply a teacher can shape a student's journey. The impact you've had on my life is profound and long-lasting, and I hope this serves as a reminder to every teacher out there. Never underestimate the difference that you can make. You hold the potential to unlock futures, to open doors to dreams students didn't even know they had. So to every teacher who continues to invest in their students, to believe in their potential even when they can't see it, thank you. Because of teachers like you, students like me can find the courage to reach higher than they ever imagined. Thank you. Is there any questions?
Incredible, Jess. This is just, yeah. I don't want to take up too much time, but you know, first of all, like, congratulations. I'm just so excited to hear about the passion and the journey. But really, out of curiosity, Jess, you're at UNSW. What are you doing at UNSW now?
Actually, it's all up in the air at the moment. I am currently enrolled in psychological science. However, I've recently come to the conclusion that I'm not quite satisfied with my degree. So I plan to actually switch to a more like fully like science-based degree. I'm thinking of switching to advanced science honors because I really miss the research, and I'm just craving to like research things and write reports again. So I am thinking of switching at the moment to a science degree.
And maybe earth science as well.
Yes, maybe earth science. I need to change my major too. So I'm seriously considering that. Yes. Yeah.
Earth science would absolutely be very delighted to have you. Joe, you have a question.
No, I just want to say congratulations, Jess.
Thank
What
you.
an amazing, sorry, amazing story. I did want to ask a question. What do you think was the greatest challenge scientifically, for you in your research? Was it the science, the scientific thinking? Was it the ability to actually do the experiment, or was it, which part of it was the hardest bit to get your head around?
To be completely honest, I think I struggled a little bit at every stage. Every
Mm.
kind of stage was a challenge for me. That's why I was so glad that Miss Hannah was there to help me. I think in particular, what stands out to me thinking back is actually conducting my experiment and having the time and the resources and the money to actually conduct it was a little like was quite difficult, especially coming from a public school. I mean, Miss Hannah went above and beyond for me. Like we got this amazing microscope. We ordered so many, cultures of Daphnia, but definitely the resources and the time constraints was probably what I struggled with the most in my investigation.
Cool. And I'll just say there's nothing wrong with changing a degree as you go along. Both my children did that. Don't worry
Thank
about it.
you. Thank you.
Yeah. I started in IT and engineering and disliked both and ended up in so any other questions? Great. We can save some other questions if they come up for after Kevin. So
Yeah.
thank you so much, Jess. Let's hand over to Kevin, who will then share his journey. Welcome, Kevin.
Alrighty. So yeah, today I'll be talking about like my own perspectives, like coming to earth science and what I've done, and also like the lessons I've learned, I guess, and like advice on how we can better promote earth sciences within high schools and better support teachers and students as well. So a bit of a self-intro, as has been already mentioned, I'm a year 12 at Knox Grammar School. I'm about to do the HSC. But over the last year and last 2 years, I've been like involved in some absolutely amazing things around earth science, International Science and Engineering Fair, meeting absolutely awesome people like Jess, International Earth Science Olympiads, which Greg here was the former director of, and also joining GSA New South Wales as a student and actually just being able to come along to technical talks and meet all the wonderful people within academia. And that's just so inspiring to me. Okay, so firstly, why did I get into earth science? So before year 11 and year 10, I didn't have all that much experience with earth science. There was Bert, oh, sorry for the typo. There was Bert from Big Bang Theory, which honestly isn't the most charismatic or like optimistic portrayal of geology within all of the sciences. This journey from the center of Earth, which I was really crushed about when I found that it wasn't scientifically accurate. I always had a dream when I was a child of being able to like find a cave of diamonds in them, but I guess that's real life and that's what science is. And when I was a child, I've been very fortunate to have a dad who made us watch docos on like plate tectonics, science, volcanoes, and all the other parts of science. And for example, from David Attenborough as well, which is how I've basically had like this basic understanding of science, but I didn't really like branch out into earth science. So why did I end up doing earth science? So first of all, I think that it's just inherently super interesting. I think of it almost as a jigsaw puzzle where all of the pieces fit together in like weird and wonderful ways. And it's almost like a party trick knowing earth science, where you look at a rock face or rock outcrop and you just start yapping on about the past environments. And I think that's something really cool that you can do. And like, especially with the big focus nowadays on earth system science, it's actually just so cool that earth science is basically a big amalgamation of all the sciences. It brings together so many different fields, and it's not really restrictive as well. There's geophys, geochem, structural, igneous metamorphic, petrology, paleontology, which Greg's a really big fan of. And I think like no matter what your own niche and what your own passion is, earth science has a spot and basically has a field for you, and it's actually really welcoming. And secondly, it's interdisciplinary, as I've already mentioned, and it relates to the real world. Like, for example, like plate tectonics that affect magma melting and the types of volcanoes that form, and that itself affects types of soils, mineral deposits, local geology, and affects agriculture and local society. Like, earth science, you can link it to so many other subjects, even outside of science and within society as well. Would Pompeii have happened without a volcano? Would Australia be as wealthy and as developed as it is nowadays without its mineral deposits? Would it still be economically booming as well? And like even niche examples, like for example, World War I was for colonialism and for control of islands. And one example of that is, I think I forget the exact names of it, but there was this group of islands off Peru where bird guano was mined and to make explosives and to make fertilizer. And would those islands have formed if without plate tectonics? Of course not. And I think it's just like earth science is almost the gateway to understanding geopolitics and a bunch of societal effects and phenomena as well. And third of all, I think earth science is important because of climate change. For example, firstly, mineral resources. We need like things like cobalt and nickel for renewable energy and to build solar panels and to make sure we have a steady electrical supply. Secondly, adapting to hazards as well, and thirdly, having better understanding of the past through like principles such as uniformitarianism. And I think like, for example, I'm currently helping on a research project that models past plate tectonics, which RD and Raoul and Sabine are involved in global carbon cycling and therefore model future climate change. And fourthly, I decided to stay within earth science and keep on doing it as long as I have, because the community is absolutely amazing. Everyone is being extremely welcoming, easy to reach out to, even to a very unexperienced high schooler like me. And from my experience, this differentiates it from, for example, other science and other fields. It's not some law like cutthroat industry for like other students I see going around me going to like law and commerce or whatever. And like whether you're going to industry, academia, or elsewhere in earth science, I figured out that like everyone is in it to support each other. And earth science is actually like truly just standing on the shoulders of giants and learning about the world around us to basically better humanity. Okay, now I'm going to talk about some of my experiences. So first of all, there's the International Science and Engineering Fair, which Anna and Jess have talked about a lot as well. So personally, what I've done was my project was about modeling sedimentation changes due to projected climate change. For example, changing rainfall patterns and sea level rise. And I've targeted a specific area of Queensland called the Burdekin region, and where a portion of the Great Barrier Reef is located. And this in turn, like sedimentation chains affects coastal ecosystems around the Great Barrier Reef, for example, wetlands and coral reefs. Because if you have too much sediment washing in, that might negatively impact or like almost like drown and suffocate our corals. And this in turn affects human society, tourism, fisheries, aquaculture, biodiversity. And my project was basically seeing by modeling where the biggest changes of sedimentation are, we can better target management strategies, where to, for example, better manage agriculture and horticulture, which is a really big source of sediment erosion. So in terms of the process of this, I was really fortunate to have reached out to Sabine and Tristan from UCID, and basically work with their Earthbite research group and use that as the software they've developed called Badlands. And this is essentially an open source surface process model where you can model sediment changes over 100 or 200,000 years. But in this case, I've repurposed it to 100 years because that's about as far as we can project for climate change. In terms of the steps of this, so firstly, data collection from using open source models, for example, future projections of rainfall from general climate models, to running the model from my own PC. Unfortunately, I didn't have access to supercomputers or superclusters. And thirdly, just writing a research report. And this stage took around 4 months. And then I was able to submit the project to OSEF, just like Jess did, around November 2023. And then afterwards, I was extremely fortunate to have been able to be accepted to the team itself, which I wasn't expecting at all because I haven't had any research experience at all within the sciences. And as a part of this, I've also been able to present my presentation at GUESS, which is the GSA New South Wales Earth Science Student Symposia, which some of you may have gone to as well. And then I was also promptly humbled there by the incredible work of other university undergrad and graduate students. And I think as part of this ICEF preparation, I've been able to go along some extraordinary experiences and just see the amazing research that other people have been. And I guess like to just put myself out there and be able to network and meet with these people. And furthermore, after that, I had to prepare for ICEF. For example, creating quad chart, creating a presentation, creating a research poster. And as part of this, we were actually driven out to Bathurst, to Charles Sturt University as part of the open day, where all of us were able to present our own projects as sort of a practice round for ICEF. And then after that, it's basically traveling to LA. So what was ICEF like? So Anna and Jess have told you about this already, but it's essentially an extremely big and exciting competition. There's 1,700 competitors from 22 categories, and the presentations are reviewed by judges who are researchers, professors as well. And as Jess said already, it was absolutely amazing because these judges aren't there to grill you for like 5 hours a day. They're there to actually like talk with you about your research, and they're just really curious to see what you've learned along the journey and like what decisions and what research process you've had in the way. And also like we had a free trip to LA, obviously, and there was a lot of touring around. We got to see Hollywood, we got to see other places as well. And I think ICEF was really awesome. Firstly, because you were able to meet people from other countries and from other parts of Australia as well, and meeting just awesome people like Jess. Like science, as I've discovered, is inherently global, and earth science is even more so, as implied by the name. And at ICEF, since like the booth that you're placed at is like separated into categories, I was able to meet a variety of research projects and other high school researchers from earth and environmental sciences. And it's really awesome because all of these projects were so diverse, and just seeing the amount of researchers and science students from different backgrounds. There's one which was AI modeling of ocean currents and pollutants, for example, carbon dioxide. There's another one which is even as small scale as just investigating the local stream, and just sampling the amount of biodiversity that's there and the effects of exposure to substances on said biodiversity. And the second reason why I really loved ICEF was because I was able to learn a lot more about the research stage and basically make connections with academia, meet people like Sabine and Jono. And I think ICEF is such a good first taste for people doing academic research. And it really pushes people to find mentors that are already in academia, and just helps like students like us form valuable connections that will definitely be useful later on in university. And thirdly, ICEF is extremely unique in Australia and generally just a once in a lifetime opportunity. I think like science, earth science, and basically every school subject is confined at the school level. Like the general pattern for most students is you study, you take tests, you do the HSC, you memorize the syllabus as if it was the Bible, and you don't do much else beyond that. And I think experiences like ICEF, not just going to the actual competition itself, but also preparing for it, it takes you above and beyond in a way that you just don't get and other people don't get, which is why like we're also passionate about sharing it. And I think ICEF, as other people have speakers have alluded to before, is also democratized in the way that normal science is. And I think it's awesome that it doesn't require like expensive equipment that only like private like schools with gajillions amount of money can use. Like I think ICEF and research is a place where like high schoolers can ask universities and just approach people to basically borrow stuff. And even nowadays, there's a lot more emphasis on the use of digital technology, which is open source and which is free, and which you don't need expensive supercomputers for. You can just run models on your own computer and actually be able to produce a research project out of that and have an amazing learning experience out of. And I think that's why like ICEF was something that I really looked forward to and enjoyed. And next, I'll be moving on to the other experience I've had, which is the International Earth Science Olympiads. So this is the biggest earth science competition for high school students, and it happens every year. It's supported by the International Geoscience Education Organization, which is also supported by the International Union of Geological Sciences. And unlike ISEF, it's not research focused, but it's based on taking tests. And it's also based on collaboration, which is something that they've really pushed this year. So instead of just having individual tests, there's parts of the competition where you basically put in groups of people from other countries and you work with them. So what was the selection process like? So around August of every year, there's an entrance test. And it was really funny because 2 years ago, when I first sat the test, and this is a common experience that a lot of other people did, is that I almost like flunked through the test. In that, as I've said before, I didn't have earth science experience or even like take earth science at school. And yeah, I was still fortunately one of the top 24 students in Australia who was able to go through the summer school. And then in January 2023, there was a summer school, which I didn't make the national team out of. So I tried again next year. Last year in August 2023, made it in again, went to the summer school again this year, and was really fortunate to have been selected for the team. So essentially for the summer school, that happens January every year at the ANU, and that's basically a 2-week intensive course for the top 24 students to basically pick the national team out of. And it's run by Greg, who's here on this call, who has recently retired, as well as Dr. Leslie Armberg and Wayne Wong. And it's essentially a crash course on most of first year earth sciences. And there's a different topic each day for each one of the 2 weeks. For example, igneous, metamorphic, structural, atmosphere. And there's also a field trip day, for example, exploring Mount Ainslie, visiting geoscience on Australia. And yes, Greg, I'll talk about why the Australian Earth Science Olympiad is so awesome later on as well. And I think it's really special that, like, for example, students like me who haven't really like sweated for or like have much geoscience or earth science knowledge beforehand can get in and be identified for the test. Okay, and in terms of the training camp that occurred July this year, and that was in the ANU Kailoa Coastal Campus. And this was really special to me because it was the first time properly exploring like the field and going on field trips outside of classrooms. Like there's only so much you can learn, like reading off PowerPoint slides about like igneous rocks or like metamorphic or structural geology, but it's really different the first time you actually go out into the field and you see all these outcrops and you start to build a story of each place, of its past environment and ecosystem. And next, I'll be moving on to what happened actually in Beijing. So the International Earth Science Olympiad was a 10-day competition this year in August, and there was 4 different sections. So first of all, there was the individual test, which was split into 2 parts, the theory and the field test. So the theory test was 8 hours long, split into 4 hours sections in the morning and the afternoon as well. And that basically tested a bunch of different parts of content, for example, geology, meteorology, planetary geology, etc. And like the Australian Earth Science Olympiads, it's also a lot more thinking based whilst being a mix of content. And I think it's really awesome in that it's not just about, oh, how many different university textbooks can you memorize? It's also about like applying these basic knowledge of like mineralogy and structural geology to be able to solve these puzzles and these other problems. And the second part of the individual test was the field test, where we were taken to 5 outcrops. And they asked us questions, for example, rock ID, making inferences on past landscapes, and even one section where they took us to an outcrop with shale, and they just went ahead and told us like, oh, go find a fossil and show it to us. One fun part, one memorable part of the field test was that one of the outcrops wasn't actually natural. It was a man-made outcrop in that it turns out that 500 years ago, there was a brick kiln. And what happened was all of the brick kiln ash was deposited into different layers. And it formed these like anticlines and synclines. And that tripped up a lot of people because they were asking questions like on that. And the next part of the Olympiads was the international team field investigation, where they took us to a field site to make observations. In this case, our group was assigned to investigate an outcrop of wind-blown sediment, and we discovered it was actually a part of a really large region called the Chinese Lost Plateau. We did research and tried to make whatever observations we can, for example, the grain size, the mineralogy, and in the end, we had to make a 15-minute presentation about how this sediment and what it tells us about past climate change. And for us, that meant topics, for example, the Asian monsoon system and how, for example, wind-blown sediment revealed things about past desertification. And the last part of the Olympiads was the Earth Science poster presentation. And this was a research poster made in one day. And the topic was, they asked us to research any factor affecting planet habitability. And for us, for our group, we talked about axial tilt and eccentricity, which can affect, for example, incoming solar radiation and thus habitability. And the really awesome part of Olympiads is for both the International Team Field Investigation and the Earth Science poster, these were, as I talked about before, these were team presentations. And where they basically put us into groups of 8 people from all of the different countries around the world. For example, I had a Filipino person, a Norwegian person in my team. And it's basically about how well you can communicate and work together. And since everyone had, for example, varying abilities of English, it was a lot more realistic, I guess, presentation and an exercise on international academia and research, and just learning about what science is actually about. It's a lot more realistic in that when you're actually going to academic research, people aren't going to tell you to take 8-hour-long theory exams. People are going to put you in the team and have you do actual proper research, which is something I found really unique about the Olympiads. Now, I'll be talking about why I love the Australian Earth Science Olympiad and why I love the International Earth Science Olympiad. So first of all, the Australian Earth Science Olympiad, which Greg has been working on for so many years and doing absolutely amazing contribution in, is that the entrance test is inherently accessible, as Greg has talked about earlier in the chat, in that there are no prerequisites required. Essentially, for both the years that I've been in summer school essentially everyone in the top 24 who make it to the summer school haven't had all that much prior experience with earth science. The lesson of the story here is that to do the Australian Earth Science Olympiad, you don't need to even take it at school. You just need good thinking skills, curiosity, and basically a passion for science. And Greg and Leslie and the team have been doing absolutely awesome work in making sure that the entrance test is accessible to everyone and you don't need prior experience to do it. And they actually test critical thinking skills rather than just memorizing knowledge. Secondly, is that the entrance test is fun. Greg, Leslie, and the team put tons of effort to make it story-based and putting lots of puns in it. And they have a lot of fun with it. And the students who take the test have a lot of fun in it as well. And unlike the other science Olympiads or maths Olympiads or other school competitions, it's not grueling. The Olympiads is a test, but it's also a fun opportunity to actually discover earth sciences and just discover the amount of topics and the diversity of content that's in there. And the third good thing about the Australian Earth Science Olympiad is that it's quite affordable. And for example, there was no registration fee this year to do the Earth Science Olympiad as well. I'm not too sure about next year yet, but there's a really big push from the organizers of all the science Olympiads, which is the Australian Science Innovations, to make earth science more popular. And I think this is a really good phenomenon or a good trend to be able to get in and actually push the Earth Science Olympiads to other high schoolers around Australia as well. And now, why did I love the International Earth Science Olympiads? So the first thing is that the IESO was the first time I've been able to experience a community earth science. It doesn't come as a surprise that there aren't huge communities of high schoolers interested in earth science in Australia, unfortunately. And I think having like-minded people is so important. And the ISO and ASO going to summer school provided a unique opportunity for this. You weren't being judged by people in industry and academia. You're having fun with your peers, with other students, going on the same learning journey as you are. And that's something that I really enjoyed and I was really fortunate to be able to take part in. Second of all is that the ISO, like, it's the first time I've been able to experience like real proper earth science. It's not like textbook questions, it's not critical, it's more critical thinking. It's not just memorizing knowledge, it's being able to take this knowledge and take the inferences you've been able to make into the field to be able to solve problems, to be able to collaborate and do proper research in. And this brings me, like, this is basically a quick wrap up of the experiences I've had. And I guess like here comes some advice of like how can other high schoolers get involved. So firstly, there's obviously some other academic competitions that I would highly encourage people to get involved in. ISO and AESO, ISEF, and the Young Scientist Awards. So like no matter if you're just wanting to do short-term competitions or longer scale research projects from even like design and tech or even science extension, there's so many opportunities out there that people can get involved in. And secondly, I think that there's a lot of opportunity for students to go into research even in the high school stage. And as Anne has done with her students and as I've been able to experience, like I've been able to just reach out to university professors, people in industry and academia, and just learn from them and just go, hey, I'm really interested in earth science and so. Do you have anything I can get involved in? And earth science is so unique in that its community is so willing to share and so willing to provide opportunities to other people as well. And thirdly, I think there's also opportunity for even high schoolers to get involved in professional organizations such as the GSA, to be able to attend technical talks, to form really valuable connections in industry and academia, and to just learn more about what earth science is actually about. And like, for example, other organizations such as SMED as well. And now, like, Anne has done a lot better job at talking about this than me, but my thoughts on how teachers can support students as well. So firstly, encouraging participation in competitions and having mentorship is really important. And we've seen today that Anne is such a superstar at doing that. Guidance for ISEF, for science extension, or even guidance just like learning more about content, and for example, the Australian Earth Science Olympiads, and like helping study and get a base level of knowledge for this. I know, for example, that James Roos Agricultural High School has a school club or training program where past students who've participated in summer school are able to teach new students. And while not every school has that sort of opportunity, I think earth science is unique because like any student who wants to get involved in earth science and wants to learn more about earth science can. And this brings me on to the second point, is that teachers can help distribute resources for studying and learning more about earth sciences. There's a lot of free materials online out there, for example, Open Textbook Library, awesome channels, for example, GeoGirl, and free past papers for the Australian Earth Science Olympiad as well. This means that like it doesn't take a whole lot of money to actually prepare or like to learn more about earth science, which is why like opportunities such as ISEF, AESO, ISO are accessible for everyone. And thirdly, I think teachers can support students by having conversations with young people about careers in earth science or even careers in science, and just breaking down stereotypes that we've unfortunately seen in earth science. My personal challenge for any teachers watching this is to get your science and earth environmental science students to register for the Australian Earth Science Olympiads, to just give it a shot. And for your science extension students to submit their projects and prepare the projects for OSEF and ISEF. Like even, for example, for the AESO, like you don't need prior experience in earth science or to have done like X amount of years of science to be able to participate in this. Like as Greg has talked about earlier, this test is about developing your critical thinking skills and actually identifying talent in here. And also, this brings me on to my last point. How can geoscientists support high school students like me? So firstly, giving more opportunities to high schoolers and university students for internships and research. Like my entire journey to earth science has been enabled by incredibly passionate people in earth sciences. For example, Sabine and Greg, who've like provided these opportunities that I wouldn't have gotten at high school. And I think it's really up to academia and industry and people already in earth science to actually advocate for this science towards high schoolers and towards young people. And secondly, I think geoscientists can support, for example, university geoscience societies through sponsorships and all that. I think it's really important to be able to like just contribute to geoscience education, as we all know that earth science is extremely important to the Australian economy and society and part of our natural and just protecting our natural heritage. And lastly, I think geoscientists could help through having conversations with younger people about careers in earth science, about like whatever resources to learn more about earth science, and just having these conversations about what their own experiences are like, so that high school students can be inspired to go into university to take a science degree. And I think geoscientists and people within this community can support high schoolers better by breaking down stereotypes that we have in society. Like I know so many people around me are discouraged from going to science degrees because teachers or their parents or other peers tell them, it's like, oh, go and do law, comm law instead. Don't do science because it's somehow seen as unemployable or like without a future. And as you guys are all a testament to, science has always have had a future and will have a future, in that earth science will always be important to Australian society, and there will always be jobs and always be opportunities for students in here. So yeah, that's my thoughts in it, into all of my journeys and experiences into earth sciences. And thank you so much.
Amazing stuff, Kevin. Congratulations to you as well. And I believe you got a prize at ICEF, didn't you? I thought.
Oh yeah. So yeah, in terms of ICEF, I won $500 from the Qatari Research, Development and Innovation Council. So thank you, Qatar. And for International Earth Science Olympiad, I came out with a gold medal in the individual category, which I thought was really special, and I'm really honored to have won that.
Well done. That's amazing. Any questions for Kevin?
Yes, Sabin, it's Russell Mears here from
Oh, hey,
Smedge.
Russell. Great to see you, mate.
Sorry I joined late, but I've been totally blown away and inspired by Jess and Kevin's presentations. You are both rock stars. Your future in science is guaranteed. I tell you, the confidence you show and the science you talk about and the journey Kevin talks about through communicating and building confidence in geoscience and geoscience careers is fantastic. I've got a couple of comments to both of you. Kevin, I think you're probably the Eddie Wu of earth sciences. And Jess, you're a rock star. Your science, your passion for science, and your achievements is fantastic. I did detect a little bit of modesty and uncertainty about your confidence in your own abilities in your part, but really, I think young people like you, and I didn't do this when I was young either, but you've got to believe in yourself and realize your potential is way orders of magnitude where you currently think you are today. Your potential is just out there. It's massive. So reach for the stars. Always look for opportunities, work hard, communicate with people, look for mentors, and you will go a long, long way for sure. And if you go a long, long way, please consider a career in mineral exploration. I've had 50 years in the game. It's been the most exciting part of my life. I've worked in all sorts of countries overseas, different parts of Australia, rainforests, deserts, Papua New Guinea, did a lot of work with helicopters, meeting First Nations people in Fiji and Papua New Guinea, working in great teams of people, having the opportunity to participate in the discovery of big deposits of gold and copper and zinc and lead, which has really been one of the highlights of my career, but really a career in mineral exploration, and particularly you, Kevin, and also you, Jessica, you would find it really exciting and a lot of support for you from groups like Smedge. the people at SMEDGE and GSA and other organisations are there to help you and support you in your journey. So please communicate with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Russell. Wonderful stuff. Anne, you had a question, comment.
Yeah, I've got a question for Kevin. Kevin, that was amazing. Thank you so much. So much passion for earth science from someone so young. I've never seen it. It's fantastic. I'm really curious about where you're headed next year. Like, what's your plan?
Probably UCID, to join Sabine doing doing
That's
earth science.
amazing. That's
I think like one day my goal is to get into policy making as well. I think there's so much awesome work done with science research and in earth science as well. And science is known for the past couple of decades, for example, how to fix climate change, but that unfortunately hasn't translated into government policy. And science isn't a thing that's talked about by either of the major parties in Australia. And I think that's got to change, right? Like everyone here knows that we need more earth scientists, we need more scientists to have a bright future for Australia.
So you guys are basically going to save the world. Thank you so much to you both. Honestly, we will be so indebted to you.
I know, what a great example of how we can make the world a better place. Jess and Kevin, wow, amazing. Jono or Addy or Raphael.
It's me this time. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks everyone for some fantastic insights into all this. Sorry, Kevin, we missed a bit of your speech because we were doing the Earth Science Olympiad test. It's a hard test, so you've done really well. Just wondering, I'd like to hear from everyone. So yeah, I mean, Kevin, especially, you've touched on the impression that people have of science, but what about like geology more specifically? What impression do people have of earth science, but more specifically like geology-based earth science?
Like from what I've seen personally, like when I tell my friends that say, oh, I'm doing earth science school, like the only thing they know about earth science, like, oh, rock hammer, go ding on rock. And like they don't know all that much about it. And I think that's a really sad thing because like a lot of young people know about climate change and the need to protect the environment, but that hasn't translated yet into a passion for earth science and more students doing earth science. So I think that more work can be done in that regard to really like just get the word out to high schoolers, for example, and to get them to start in this path towards science and earth science.
And Jess or Anne, like, are people even aware of geology much? What do they think of it? Yeah.
Look, when I was at school many years ago, we had a genius of a geology teacher that we all respected so much. She was, really charismatic. She had a patch over one eye. She was like this enigma. We loved her. Such a genius of a lady. But then, she left. We didn't have a replacement geology teacher, and it sort of whittled down. Everyone did biology, chemistry, physics, but no one really did geology. It just died before we got a chance to know what it was about. As a teacher, we buy the kit, so we try to get the kids involved. I had a colleague, an ex-head teacher, a couple of head teachers before me who sometimes helps out casually. And I used to sit with him and I'd say, just show me what it is that, you're so passionate about. Why did you go into, he was a geologist. Why did you go into geology? I know there's stuff there, but I can't wrap my head around it. I get hints of it from meeting amazing people like you guys, but I don't think there's enough support for teachers who train in science to get excited about geology the same way you can so easily get excited about any other field, I think. And that just comes from a place of ignorance, because just listening to like Kevin and Jess, like it's so exciting, but I don't know how to feel that about all of it. Like, it's, teaching year 8 about metamorphic and igneous and sedimentary, like we make it as exciting as we know how, but then it's over and we don't do the field trips. We wouldn't know where to start. Like, it'd be so amazing to get support for schools for field trips, because I think that would just be so engaging if you could actually get an expert, not us trying to do it because we don't know enough. I at the beach, I'll say to my kids, oh, look at that, sedimentary, whatever. But that's not the same as someone who really knows what's going on, who's going to say, this shows that this has happened in this area, which would be amazing. I just think we need more support.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, and in terms of field work and the GSA, maybe that's where we can also step in and help. Joe, you've got a question or comment.
Well, a couple of comments. One to Kevin. That policy point is a really, really important point. And if you look at places like Geoscience Australia, they actually take in graduates and they train them in all the different areas across the Geoscience Australia. And Geoscience Australia itself is a very important vehicle for the government to understand geology. CSIRO, who I work for, is similar in many respects, but we're a much broader spectrum. We do everything, anything you can think of. But Geoscience Australia certainly has an intake, sorry, of graduate students every year. Not a huge number, but I'm sure you could do it. The other one was actually just following on from what Anne was saying about fieldwork. So important. It's absolutely essential. You talk to most geologists, it's the hook. It's the thing that gets them really excited. I once did a course for mature students wanting to go to Newcastle Uni, and we stood on top of the hill and we talked about what it looked like 300 million years ago, and their jaws were dropping. It was one of those moments you go, yes. So yeah, if we can do field work or get field work going or have some input into field work, I'm sure that would help a lot.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's my sixpence worth.
Sure. Yeah.
Anne
Yes,
raised the point about education of science teachers. SMEDGE is a major sponsor of TSEP. I missed the start of this Zoom webinar. So Anne, are you involved with the TSEP program? Because I know we've got Jill Stevens on and Phil just left. Because I think TSEP's a great thing to do, but there's obviously more things TSEP can do for you.
Yeah, no, I'm not familiar with it, but I've just heard about it and I will be looking it up. For sure.
For sure. Get on board for sure. It's a great,
yeah, 100%.
a great initiative to educate earth science teachers so you are better educated and industry people can get involved as well to help the education at the rock face. Another thing SMEDGE supports is the establishment of geotrails and geo apps and things like that, so that the general public and students can wander through geology and learn about the rocks. The rocks have got a lot to tell everybody, as we all know as geologists, and we need to communicate that to the people in the street. The geotrails is one way. Another way is the National Rock Garden in Canberra, which is currently being moved from a temporary location up to right next to the visitor centre in the National Arboretum. There's a kind of large rocks there, 2 or 3 meters long by 1 or 2 meters across, from all around Australia, Antarctica, and it's a great story to take students to and take the public to educate them about rocks and geology, as well as Geoscience Office in Canberra.
Thank you so much. Lots of great resources today. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
I think Jono raised a good point that we might have spoken about before about like teachers not knowing where to access this information and the fact that there's a whole plethora of different resources out there. And maybe one thing that GSA could do, for example, is like have a section of the website designed for teachers, and that is public facing with all of these like free resources, with free textbooks, with links to other science education organizations and like where to find support.
Yeah, so Kevin, look, that's a good point. That's something I co-chair with Bonnie Teese, the Education Outreach Specialist Group. And I think one of the things we're trying to do, and we'd love to have you and anyone here involved, and I'm going to reach out to Greg and TSEP and AusEarthEd and everyone, right, is a website that is not the GSA website, because that's a bit of a mess, but a website that is aimed at teachers, at students, at careers advisors, at the parents of the students. And it's not to reinvent the wheel of what AusEarthEd and TSEP are doing, right? It's also like, okay, what if your high school doesn't offer earth environmental science? Well, it turns out actually that you can do it through TAFE Digital, right, by remotely. You can take science extension. People aren't aware of these things. And what kind of careers could you go in? Like, of course, Russell, I agree. Part of the UN SDGs is to meet net zero targets. We need copper. We need these things, mineral resources. But it's not just mineral resources. People are working in glaciology, in geomorphology, oceans, coasts, you name it, right? And highlighting the different career pathways is important, but also where you can study it. If you want to study paleontology, like I wouldn't say come to Sydney Uni, like go to Armidale, is the example I would use. So yeah, definitely some work to be done.
And I think it's also about the notion, like this misconception that people have is like for high schooler to study a subject, they need to be able to take that subject within the high school. And I know like for a fact that like not every high school is going to be able to offer earth and environmental sciences just because of resource constraints. But like with the digital age and with the internet and with all of the amazing people making free resources out there, like any high schooler can go out there and just like learn to their heart's content.
Okay. Any last concluding comments, remarks? Oh, okay. Well, look, I'm going to wrap it up. I want to again thank Anne, Jess, Kevin. You inspire me. You've inspired me. I mean, I think this is just all incredible.